The mountain lion had been tracking the herd of deer for nearly 3 hours. Its massive paws moved silently across the forest floor, each step calculated and precise. This was no ordinary predator. The locals had named it the Supreme Hunter, after witnessing its incredible ability to take down prey twice its size. Its golden eyes gleamed with intelligence that seemed almost supernatural, and its body bore the scars of countless successful hunts. The autumn sun filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dancing shadows across the woodland clearing ahead. The Supreme Hunter could smell the gathering long before it came into view. Dozens of deer had congregated near the stream, their heads lowered to drink from the crystal-clear water. Among them were fawns, does, and several impressive bucks with antlers that caught the afternoon light. It was a feast waiting to happen, and the mountain lion's instincts screamed at it to choose a target. The predator crouched low behind a fallen log, its muscles coiled like springs ready to release. Years of evolution had programmed every fiber of its being for this exact moment. The deer were vulnerable, distracted by their thirst and the social dynamics of their herd. Some of the younger ones played at the water's edge, splashing and leaping without a care in the world. The older deer remained more vigilant, but even they seemed relaxed in the peaceful setting. The Supreme Hunter's eyes scanned the gathering methodically. Experience had taught it to look for the weak, the sick, or the isolated. A successful hunt required choosing the right target. Its gaze passed over a large buck that stood at the edge of the group. Too strong, too alert. Then it spotted an elderly doe that limped slightly as she moved toward the water. Perfect. The mountain lion shifted its weight, preparing to launch its attack. But then something caught its attention. At the far end of the clearing, partially hidden by a cluster of bushes, stood a figure that didn't belong. The Supreme Hunter's ears perked forward, and its whiskers twitched as it processed this new information. It was a human, a young man who appeared to be in his mid-20s. He wore simple hiking clothes and carried a camera with a large lens pointed toward the deer. The mountain lion had encountered humans before. Most of the time they meant danger. The sound of gunfire, the smell of fear, the invasion of its territory. But this human seemed different. He wasn't hunting. He wasn't threatening. He was simply observing, just as the Supreme Hunter was observing. The young man's face showed a mixture of wonder and concentration as he carefully adjusted his camera settings, trying to capture the beauty of the wild gathering before him. What happened next would puzzle wildlife experts for years to come. The Supreme Hunter, instead of continuing its hunt or retreating from the human presence, did something completely unexpected. It stood up from its hiding place, abandoning all pretense of stealth. The movement caused several deer to look up in alarm, but the mountain lion wasn't focused on them anymore. Its full attention was locked on the human. The young man noticed the movement immediately. His camera swung toward the Supreme Hunter, and through his viewfinder he found himself staring directly into the eyes of one of nature's most formidable predators. Time seemed to freeze. The deer scattered in all directions, their hooves thundering across the forest floor as they fled to safety. But the man and the mountain lion remained perfectly still, locked in a moment of unexpected connection. The Supreme Hunter's golden eyes met the human's brown ones. There was no aggression in the predator's gaze, no hunger, no threat. Instead, there was something that seemed almost like curiosity. The young man felt his heart pounding in his chest, but he wasn't afraid. He had spent years studying wildlife, documenting nature's most intimate moments, but nothing had prepared him for this encounter. The intelligence he saw in those feline eyes was startling, almost unsettling in its depth. Neither of them moved. The forest around them had gone silent, as if the entire wilderness was holding its breath. The Supreme Hunter took a single step forward, then another. The man's logical mind told him to back away, to make himself appear larger, to make noise. But something deeper, some primal instinct told him to remain still. This was not a hunt. This was something else entirely. The mountain lion stopped about 20 feet away from the human. It sat down, its tail curling around its body in a posture that seemed almost contemplative. The man slowly lowered his camera, realizing that no photograph could capture the essence of this moment. This was about more than documentation. This was about two intelligent beings from different worlds acknowledging each other's existence. The Supreme Hunter tilted its head slightly, studying the human with an intensity that suggested it was memorizing every detail. The young man noticed the scars on the predator's body, each one telling a story of survival and struggle. He saw the power in its muscles, the sharpness of its claws, the teeth that could tear through flesh with ease. Yet here it sat, peaceful and patient as if waiting for something. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The sun continued its journey across the sky, and the sounds of the forest gradually returned. Birds began to chirp again, insects resumed their buzzing, and somewhere in the distance a woodpecker hammered against a tree trunk. But the man and the supreme hunter remained in their strange tableau, two souls from different species sharing a moment of profound understanding. The young man's name was Marcus Chen, and he had dedicated his life to wildlife conservation. He had grown up in the city but had always felt drawn to the natural world. After completing his degree in environmental science, he had spent the last 5 years traveling to remote locations, documenting endangered species and their habitats. He had seen lions in Africa, tigers in India, and bears in Alaska, but never had he experienced anything like this silent communication with the supreme hunter. The mountain lion finally broke the gaze, looking back toward the stream where the deer had been gathered. Its expression, if such a thing could be read on a feline face, seemed almost wistful. The easy meal was gone, scattered to the four winds. But the supreme hunter didn't seem to regret its choice. It turned back to Marcus once more, and in that final look something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, a recognition of kinship across the vast divide that separated their species. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the supreme hunter rose to its feet and turned away. It moved with unhurried grace, disappearing into the forest shadows as silently as it had emerged. Marcus stood there for a long time afterward, trying to process what had just happened. His camera hung forgotten at his side, the memory card full of pictures of deer but none of the mountain lion. It didn't matter. What he had witnessed couldn't be captured by a lens anyway. Marcus couldn't shake the encounter from his mind as he made his way back to his cabin that evening. The small wooden structure sat at the edge of the national forest, a temporary home he had rented for the season. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared dinner, the adrenaline from the afternoon still coursing through his veins. He had been in dangerous situations before, had stood within charging distance of elephants, and had accidentally stumbled upon a grizzly bear's den. But none of those experiences compared to the intensity of locking eyes with the supreme hunter. The local ranger station had warned him about the mountain lion when he first arrived. Sarah Mitchell, the head ranger, had shown him blurry trail camera photos of the massive predator. She had explained that this particular animal was special, different from other mountain lions in ways that wildlife biologists couldn't quite explain. It showed problem-solving abilities that seemed beyond normal animal intelligence. It had been observed using tools, something rarely documented in big cats outside of captivity. That night, Marcus sat at his laptop, trying to write his field notes about the encounter. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain how to put the experience into words. How could he explain that an apex predator had abandoned a hunt to simply look at him? How could he describe the intelligence he had seen in those golden eyes? His colleagues would think he was being overly romantic, attributing human characteristics to an animal operating purely on instinct. But Marcus knew what he had experienced was real and undeniable. He uploaded his photos from the day, scrolling through images of the deer herd by the stream. They were good shots, technically perfect with proper lighting and composition. But they felt hollow now, empty of the magic that had filled that clearing. He closed his laptop and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness of the forest. Somewhere out there, the supreme hunter was prowling through the night, perhaps hunting under the moonlight, perhaps resting in some hidden den. The next morning, Marcus decided to return to the clearing. He told himself it was for his research, to document the deer herd's behavior patterns. But deep down, he knew he was hoping for another encounter with the mountain lion. He packed his gear carefully, adding extra memory cards and a fresh battery for his camera. The autumn air was crisp and cool as he set out, his breath forming small clouds in the morning light. When he reached the clearing, he found it empty. The stream babbled peacefully, and the grass showed evidence of the deer herd's presence, but no animals were visible. Marcus set up his equipment and settled in to wait. Wildlife photography required patience above all else, the ability to sit still for hours waiting for the perfect moment. He had learned this lesson years ago, and it had served him well throughout his career. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the forest around him. Marcus ate a granola bar and drank from his water bottle, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. He saw squirrels chasing each other through the branches, heard the calls of various birds, and watched a fox trot along the opposite side of the stream. But there was no sign of the supreme hunter. Just as he was beginning to think about packing up for the day, movement caught his eye. Not the mountain lion, but something equally interesting. A group of hikers emerged from the trail on the far side of the clearing. There were 4 of them, young college students by the look of it, laughing and talking loudly as they made their way toward the stream. Marcus sighed internally. Their noise would scare away any wildlife in the area for hours. The hikers began setting up their lunch by the water's edge, completely oblivious to the fact that they were in prime mountain lion territory. Marcus considered calling out to warn them, to let them know they should be more cautious. But before he could make a decision, he saw something that made his blood run cold. On the ridge above the hikers, partially concealed by the rocks, crouched the supreme hunter. The mountain lion was in full hunting mode now, its body low to the ground, every muscle tensed for action. But it wasn't looking at the hikers. Its attention was fixed on something beyond them, something Marcus couldn't see from his position. The supreme hunter moved with incredible stealth, circling around the ridge, using the terrain to its advantage. The hikers continued their lunch, completely unaware of the predator's presence mere yards above them. Marcus felt torn between his duty to warn the hikers and his desire to observe this incredible display of natural behavior. The mountain lion wasn't threatening the humans. It was focused on something else, hunting with a precision that spoke to millions of years of evolutionary refinement. He raised his camera slowly, documenting the scene through his lens. Then he saw what the supreme hunter was stalking. On the opposite side of the clearing, partially hidden in the underbrush, was a massive wild boar. The animal was easily 300 pounds of muscle and aggression, with tusks that could gore a predator with ease. Wild boars were dangerous prey, known for fighting back ferociously when cornered. Most mountain lions avoided them, preferring easier targets. But the supreme hunter seemed undeterred. The predator moved with calculated patience, positioning itself for the perfect angle of attack. The hikers below remained oblivious, their chatter and laughter masking any sound the mountain lion might make. Marcus watched through his camera, torn between fascination and concern. If the supreme hunter attacked and missed, the wounded boar could easily charge toward the hikers. But if he warned them now, he might startle the mountain lion and cause the very disaster he was trying to prevent. The supreme hunter suddenly paused in its approach. Its head turned, and once again those golden eyes found Marcus through the trees. The intensity of that gaze was just as powerful as it had been the day before. Time seemed to slow as the mountain lion and the human shared another moment of connection. In that instant, Marcus understood something profound. The supreme hunter knew he was there. It had known all along, and somehow it was choosing to trust him with its presence. The mountain lion returned its attention to the boar. It crept forward another few feet, then froze. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of the predator directly to its prey. The wild boar's head shot up, its small eyes scanning for danger. It spotted the supreme hunter immediately and let out a deep, grunting squeal that echoed through the clearing. The hikers jumped up in alarm, looking around wildly for the source of the sound. What happened next would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. The supreme hunter, instead of attacking or retreating, did something completely unexpected. It stood up to its full height, completely visible on the ridge above. The boar turned and crashed away through the underbrush, and the hikers spotted the mountain lion. Their screams filled the air as they scrambled to grab their belongings, preparing to flee. But the supreme hunter didn't move toward them. Instead, it looked directly at Marcus again, held his gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked calmly away along the ridge. It moved with unhurried dignity, as if it were a king surveying its domain rather than a predator who had just lost its prey. The message was clear. It could have attacked. It could have caused chaos and fear, but it chose not to. It chose to walk away. The hikers didn't wait to see where the mountain lion went. They fled down the trail, their voices fading into the distance. Marcus remained in his hiding spot, his camera still recording, his mind racing to process what he had just witnessed. The supreme hunter had given up another hunt, this time one that had required significant effort to set up. And once again it seemed to be making a choice, demonstrating an awareness that went beyond simple animal instinct. Marcus spent the next several days reviewing his footage and researching everything he could find about mountain lion behavior. He reached out to colleagues at universities across the country, experts in animal cognition and behavior. Most were skeptical of his descriptions, suggesting he was reading too much into coincidental encounters. But a few were intrigued, particularly Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the Wildlife Cognition Institute in California. Dr. Rodriguez had spent 20 years studying intelligence in wild predators. She had documented tool use in raccoons, complex problem-solving in coyotes, and what appeared to be cultural transmission of hunting techniques in wolf packs. When Marcus sent her his footage and detailed field notes, she responded within hours, asking if she could come visit and observe the supreme hunter herself. Marcus felt conflicted about this. Part of him wanted to protect his discovery, to keep the mountain lion's remarkable behavior a secret from the scientific community. He worried that increased attention would disrupt whatever was happening between him and the supreme hunter, would turn their unique connection into just another research subject. But his commitment to conservation and understanding wildlife ultimately won out. If this mountain lion truly displayed unprecedented cognitive abilities, the scientific world needed to know. Dr. Rodriguez arrived 3 days later, bringing with her an impressive array of recording equipment and a young graduate student named Tom Bradley. Marcus met them at the ranger station, where Sarah Mitchell joined them for a briefing. The head ranger was excited about the possibility of having researchers studying the supreme hunter, seeing it as an opportunity to learn more about the mountain lion that had become legendary in the area. Sarah shared stories that locals had told about the supreme hunter over the years. There was the time it had led a lost child back to a hiking trail by walking ahead of her until she followed. The incident where it had scared off a black bear that was threatening a campsite, something unheard of given the size difference between the species, and multiple reports of the mountain lion appearing to humans but never showing aggression, as if it was simply curious about the strange two-legged creatures in its territory. Marcus found these stories both fascinating and troubling. If they were true, they suggested the supreme hunter had been displaying unusual behavior for years. But they also raised uncomfortable questions. Why had no one studied this animal before? Why was it only now, through his encounters, that the scientific community was taking notice? Sarah explained that most of the reports had been dismissed as exaggerations or misidentifications. People saw what they wanted to see, and a mountain lion acting strangely made for good campfire stories. The next morning, Marcus led Dr. Rodriguez and Tom to the clearing where he had first encountered the supreme hunter. He felt nervous, like a person introducing two friends and hoping they would get along. What if the mountain lion didn't appear? What if it did appear but behaved like any other mountain lion, proving that Marcus had indeed been reading too much into random encounters? They set up their equipment and settled in to wait. Dr. Rodriguez was professional and focused, occasionally making notes in her field journal. Tom fidgeted with his camera, clearly excited by the prospect of documenting something extraordinary. Marcus tried to relax, reminding himself that wildlife operated on its own schedule, not human convenience. The first day passed without incident. They saw deer, squirrels, and various birds, but no mountain lion. Dr. Rodriguez seemed unconcerned, explaining that patience was the foundation of all good wildlife research. Tom looked disappointed but tried to hide it. As they packed up their gear at sunset, Marcus felt a familiar doubt creeping in. Maybe his colleagues had been right. Maybe he had romanticized natural behavior into something more significant than it actually was. The second day started much the same way. They took up their positions before dawn, hoping to catch the mountain lion during its active hunting hours. The forest came alive with morning sounds, and slowly the sun painted the clearing in shades of gold and amber. Marcus found himself getting lost in the beauty of it all, remembering why he had fallen in love with wildlife photography in the first place. Around mid-morning, Dr. Rodriguez suddenly tensed beside him. She had spotted something moving through the trees on the far side of the clearing. Marcus raised his camera, his heart beginning to pound. Through his lens, he could see a familiar golden shape moving with liquid grace between the shadows. The supreme hunter had arrived. The mountain lion emerged into the clearing and immediately looked in their direction. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the recognition in its eyes. The supreme hunter had found him again, or perhaps it had known they were there all along. The predator sat down, its posture relaxed, and simply observed them observing it. Dr. Rodriguez was making rapid notes, whispering excitedly about the animal's behavior. What happened next exceeded everyone's expectations. The Supreme Hunter stood and began walking directly toward them. Not in a stalking posture, not with the predatory focus of a hunter, but with a casual gait that suggested curiosity rather than aggression. Dr. Rodriguez inhaled sharply, and Tom fumbled with his camera trying to capture every moment. The mountain lion stopped about 30 feet away, well within striking distance but showing no signs of hostility. It looked at each of them in turn, its golden eyes seeming to assess and memorize their faces. When its gaze settled on Marcus, he saw what he thought might be recognition, a connection that had been established in their previous encounters, acknowledged now in front of witnesses. Dr. Rodriguez slowly moved her hand toward her recording equipment, trying to document the animal's vocalizations. The Supreme Hunter watched her movement with interest but didn't react with fear or aggression. Instead, it tilted its head in a gesture that seemed almost quizzical, as if asking what this strange human was doing. Tom had frozen completely. His camera pointed at the mountain lion, but his finger, seemingly unable to press the shutter button. The mountain lion then did something that would become the centerpiece of Dr. Rodriguez's subsequent research papers. It deliberately walked to a fallen log between them and the researchers, jumped up onto it and lay down. Not in a defensive position, not ready to spring into action, but in a posture of complete relaxation. It was as if the Supreme Hunter was saying, "I am here. I am not afraid of you. I am choosing to share this space with you." They sat like that for almost an hour. The Supreme Hunter occasionally yawned, showing its impressive teeth, or licked its paws in a grooming gesture. But mostly it just rested, keeping them company in a way that defied everything known about wild mountain lion behavior. Dr. Rodriguez's whispered commentary into her recorder captured her amazement at what they were witnessing. This wasn't just unusual behavior. This was something entirely unprecedented. Eventually, the sound of other hikers approaching on a distant trail caused the Supreme Hunter to lift its head. It looked toward the sound, then back at Marcus and his companions. In that moment, Marcus felt he understood what was happening. The mountain lion was making a choice about which humans it would interact with. It had chosen him, and now it had extended that trust to Dr. Rodriguez and Tom. But it wasn't ready to reveal itself to just anyone who wandered into the forest. The Supreme Hunter rose from the log with fluid grace and stretched, first its front legs, then its back, in a gesture that was both feline and somehow oddly human in its casualness. It looked at Marcus one more time, and he could have sworn he saw something like satisfaction in its expression. Then it turned and disappeared into the forest with the same unhurried dignity it had shown before, leaving 3 researchers sitting in stunned silence. The footage and observations from that day changed everything. Dr. Rodriguez immediately contacted her colleagues at research institutions around the world. Within a week, Marcus's quiet research site had become the center of attention for the wildlife biology community. Scientists who specialized in animal cognition, behavior, and communication all wanted to study the Supreme Hunter and understand what made this particular mountain lion so unique. But with increased attention came complications. News of the remarkable mountain lion spread beyond academic circles. Local newspapers picked up the story, then regional television stations, and finally national media outlets. Everyone wanted to see the Supreme Hunter that seemed to choose its human companions. Tour operators began offering Supreme Hunter viewing expeditions, and the small town nearest to the national forest saw an influx of tourists hoping to witness the legendary mountain lion for themselves. Marcus watched this transformation with growing concern. The quiet forest where he had first connected with the Supreme Hunter became crowded with people carrying cameras and binoculars. They trampled through the underbrush, left trash along the trails, and spoke in loud voices that scared away the local wildlife. The deer no longer came to the clearing by the stream. The foxes and rabbits that had been common sights disappeared into deeper parts of the forest, and most troubling of all, the Supreme Hunter stopped appearing. Sarah Mitchell, the head ranger, found herself overwhelmed by the sudden interest in her forest. She had to assign additional rangers to patrol the area and enforce rules about staying on marked trails. She expressed her frustration to Marcus one evening at the ranger station. explaining that the very thing that made the Supreme Hunter special was being destroyed by people's desire to experience it. The mountain lion needed space, privacy, and the freedom to behave naturally. The crowds were taking all of that away. Marcus felt responsible for what was happening. If he had kept his observations to himself, if he had never invited Dr. Rodriguez to study the animal, the Supreme Hunter would still be living peacefully in its territory. But he also knew that wasn't realistic. Science required sharing discoveries, building on collective knowledge to advance understanding. The problem wasn't the research itself, but the way the public had responded to it. Dr. Rodriguez proposed a solution. She suggested creating a protected observation area, limiting the number of people who could visit, and establishing strict protocols for anyone wanting to study the Supreme Hunter. She had connections with conservation organizations that could provide funding and expertise. Sarah was interested but skeptical. The forest was public land, and restricting access would be complicated both legally and politically. However, she agreed to explore the possibility if it meant protecting the unique animal that had made her forest famous. 3 weeks passed without any sign of the Supreme Hunter. The tourists grew bored and began to leave, disappointed that the mountain lion wasn't performing on demand for their entertainment. The researchers maintained their observation posts, but even Dr. Rodriguez was beginning to wonder if they had scared the animal away permanently. Marcus spent his days in the clearing, hoping against hope that the Supreme Hunter would return, that the connection they had shared wasn't broken beyond repair. Late one evening, as the sun was setting and Marcus was preparing to pack up his equipment for another fruitless day, he heard a sound behind him. It was barely audible, just the faintest rustle of leaves. He turned slowly, his heart jumping in his chest. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the Supreme Hunter. The mountain lion looked different somehow, thinner perhaps, or maybe just tired, but its golden eyes held the same intelligence, the same remarkable awareness that had captivated Marcus from the beginning. The Supreme Hunter didn't approach immediately. It stood at the tree line, watching Marcus with what seemed like caution. This was different from their previous encounters. The easy trust that had developed between them appeared to have been replaced with wariness. Marcus remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. He wanted to apologize, to explain that he hadn't meant for any of this to happen, that he had only wanted to understand and protect the remarkable creature before him. Minutes passed in silence. The forest around them grew darker as the sun continued its descent. Finally, the Supreme Hunter took a single step forward, then another. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if testing whether this human could still be trusted. Marcus kept his hands visible and non-threatening, his camera resting on the ground beside him. This moment wasn't about documentation. It was about rebuilding a connection that had been damaged by human intrusion. The mountain lion stopped about 20 feet away, the same distance it had maintained during their first encounter. It sat down, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. Marcus could see something in the animal's eyes that he hadn't seen before. It wasn't fear exactly, but perhaps a new understanding of what humans were capable of. The Supreme Hunter had learned that not all humans were as trustworthy as Marcus had seemed to be. The crowds, the noise, the disruption of its territory had taught it a hard lesson about the species that claimed to want to protect nature while simultaneously destroying it. Marcus found himself speaking softly, his voice barely above a whisper. He told the Supreme Hunter about the changes that had happened, about how he had tried to study it respectfully, but had inadvertently brought chaos to the forest. He explained about Dr. Rodriguez's plan to create a protected area, about Sarah Mitchell's efforts to control the crowds. He knew the mountain lion couldn't understand his words, but he hoped somehow it could sense his sincerity, his genuine desire to make things right. The Supreme Hunter listened, its ears swiveling to catch every sound. When Marcus finished speaking, the mountain lion stood and began walking toward him. Marcus's heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain still. The predator moved with purpose, closing the distance between them until it was only a few feet away. At this proximity, Marcus could see every detail of its face, the individual whiskers, the subtle patterns in its fur, the depth of intelligence in its eyes. Then the Supreme Hunter did something extraordinary. It lowered its head and pushed it gently against Marcus's leg, much like a domestic cat might do with a trusted human. The gesture lasted only a moment before the mountain lion stepped back, but it was enough. It was forgiveness, or perhaps simply an acknowledgement that their connection, while tested, had not been completely broken. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes, overwhelmed by the honor of this moment. The Supreme Hunter turned and walked a short distance away, then looked back at Marcus. It was an invitation clear as day. The mountain lion wanted him to follow. Marcus grabbed his camera bag and stood up, his legs stiff from sitting still for so long. He followed the Supreme Hunter as it led him away from the clearing, deeper into the forest along a path he had never taken before. They walked for nearly an hour as the darkness deepened around them. The Supreme Hunter moved confidently through the shadows, occasionally looking back to ensure Marcus was still following. Finally, they emerged into a small hidden valley that Marcus had never known existed. A stream flowed through the center, and the trees created a natural canopy overhead. It was beautiful, pristine, and most importantly, untouched by the crowds that had invaded the forest. The Supreme Hunter sat down by the stream and looked at Marcus expectantly. The message was clear. This was its secret place, a sanctuary away from the chaos that humans had brought to its territory. By bringing Marcus here, the mountain lion was demonstrating trust once again, but also communicating something important. It was showing him that there were still wild places that needed to be protected, that deserved to remain hidden from human eyes except for those who truly understood the value of leaving nature undisturbed. Marcus spent the night in that hidden valley, though he barely slept. The Supreme Hunter remained nearby, sometimes visible in the moonlight, sometimes just a shadow moving between the trees. It was hunting, Marcus realized, going about its natural business while still maintaining a presence near the human who had followed it there. By dawn, the mountain lion had made several kills, small prey like rabbits and a turkey, demonstrating the efficiency that had earned it the title of Supreme Hunter. As the sun rose, painting the valley in shades of pink and gold, Marcus understood what the Supreme Hunter had been teaching him throughout all their encounters. It wasn't just about the remarkable intelligence of one individual animal. It was about respect for the wild, about understanding that humans were visitors in these spaces, not owners. The mountain lion had chosen to share its world with Marcus, but on its own terms in its own time, and with clear boundaries about what was acceptable. When Marcus finally made his way back to the ranger station later that morning, he found Dr. Rodriguez and Sarah Mitchell waiting for him. They had been worried when he didn't return the previous evening, but they had trusted that he knew what he was doing. Marcus told them about the hidden valley, but he deliberately kept its location vague. Some secrets, he explained, needed to remain secret. Some wild places needed to stay wild. Dr. Rodriguez understood immediately. Her research had always been driven by a desire to understand animals, not to exploit them. She proposed a new approach to studying the Supreme Hunter. Instead of trying to document every moment of the mountain lion's life, they would observe from a respectful distance, allowing the animal to choose when and how to interact with humans. They would focus their research on understanding how to coexist with intelligent predators, rather than simply cataloging their behaviors. Sarah Mitchell was relieved by this approach. She had been struggling with how to balance public interest in the Supreme Hunter with the need to protect the animal and its habitat. With Dr. Rodriguez's support, she implemented new regulations. The clearing where tourists had congregated was closed to the general public. Only researchers with proper permits and training would be allowed to observe the Supreme Hunter. And even then, only in limited numbers and with strict protocols about maintaining distance and respecting the animal's space. The changes took time to implement, and not everyone was happy about them. Tour operators complained about lost revenue. Some tourists felt entitled to see the famous mountain lion after traveling long distances. Local media outlets criticized the restrictions as elitist, arguing that wildlife belonged to everyone. But Marcus, Dr. Rodriguez, and Sarah stood firm. The Supreme Hunter's well-being had to come first, even if it meant disappointing people who wanted to experience something extraordinary. Over the following months, the forest gradually returned to its natural state. The deer came back to the clearing by the stream. The foxes and rabbits reappeared along the trails. The constant human noise faded away, replaced by the authentic sounds of wilderness. And slowly, cautiously, the Supreme Hunter began to show itself again to the small group of researchers who had earned its trust. But something had changed in the mountain lion. It was more selective now about when it appeared, more careful about maintaining boundaries. The easy approachability it had shown in the early encounters was gone, replaced by a wariness that spoke to lessons learned. Marcus mourned this loss while recognizing it as necessary. The Supreme Hunter had learned that not all humans could be trusted, that its remarkable nature made it vulnerable in ways that normal mountain lions weren't. Dr. Rodriguez's research took on new dimensions. She began documenting not just the Supreme Hunter's cognitive abilities, but also its capacity to learn from experience, to adapt its behavior based on environmental changes. She theorized that the mountain lion's intelligence had developed partly as a response to increasing human presence in its territory. Unlike other mountain lions that simply avoided humans or became aggressive, the Supreme Hunter had developed a more nuanced approach, learning to distinguish between different types of human behavior and responding accordingly. One afternoon, Marcus was sitting in the designated observation area when the Supreme Hunter appeared with something he had never seen before. The mountain lion was accompanied by 2 cubs barely 3 months old and still showing their spotted juvenile coats. They tumbled over each other playfully while their mother watched with patient attentiveness. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The Supreme Hunter had chosen to introduce him to her offspring, a gesture that spoke volumes about the trust that still existed between them. The cubs were curious about the human, approaching closer than their mother would allow. The Supreme Hunter made a low sound in her throat, and the cubs immediately retreated to her side. But she didn't take them away. Instead, she settled down with them, allowing Marcus to observe and photograph from a distance. It was clear what she was doing. She was teaching her cubs about humans, showing them that some of these strange creatures could be trusted while others needed to be avoided. Over the next several weeks, Marcus documented the Supreme Hunter teaching her cubs. He watched as she showed them how to hunt, demonstrating techniques with remarkable patience. The mother would catch small prey and release it for the cubs to practice on, correcting their mistakes with gentle nudges and encouraging sounds. But what fascinated Marcus most was how she seemed to be teaching them specifically about humans. The Supreme Hunter would bring her cubs to the edge of the observation area, keeping them at a safe distance while allowing them to watch Marcus and the occasional other researcher. She would position herself between the cubs and the humans, a clear protective stance, but she didn't flee or show aggression. Instead, she appeared to be demonstrating that these particular humans were not threats, that they could be observed and even approached under the right circumstances. One of the cubs was bolder than the other, showing the same curious nature that had defined its mother. This young male would creep forward, testing boundaries until the Supreme Hunter would call him back. Marcus noticed that she was teaching patience, showing her offspring that curiosity was acceptable but needed to be balanced with caution. The other cub, a female, was more reserved, preferring to watch from the safety of her mother's side. The Supreme Hunter seemed to accept these different personalities, adapting her teaching style to each cub's temperament. Dr. Rodriguez was particularly excited by these observations. She explained to Marcus that they were witnessing the transmission of learned behavior from one generation to the next, something that had been documented in other species but rarely in solitary predators like mountain lions. The Supreme Hunter wasn't just remarkably intelligent herself. She was passing that intelligence and her unique understanding of humans onto her offspring. This had profound implications for how these mountain lions would interact with humans in the future. As the cubs grew larger and more confident, their personalities became even more distinct. The male, whom Marcus privately named Shadow, showed signs of his mother's exceptional intelligence. He would watch Marcus with the same intense, analytical gaze that the Supreme Hunter had displayed from their first meeting. He seemed to understand that the camera was a tool, not a threat, and would sometimes position himself in ways that seemed almost deliberately photogenic. The female cub, whom Marcus called Whisper for her quiet nature, was more cautious but equally observant. She paid attention to everything, storing information for future use. The Supreme Hunter continued her lessons throughout the summer months. Marcus watched as she taught her cubs about different types of prey, how to read weather patterns, and how to navigate the complex social dynamics of the forest. But most importantly, she taught them about boundaries. There were places in the forest that were theirs alone, like the hidden valley she had shown Marcus. There were places shared with other animals where respect and caution were necessary. And there were places where humans could be encountered, where different rules applied. One day, the Supreme Hunter led her cubs to a spot near a well-used hiking trail. They crouched in the underbrush, hidden from view, and waited. Eventually, a group of hikers passed by, chatting loudly and playing music from a portable speaker. The Supreme Hunter kept her cubs completely still, showing them that these types of humans needed to be avoided. They were unpredictable, unaware of their surroundings, and potentially dangerous. The cubs watched intently, learning to distinguish between hikers who respected the forest and those who trampled through it with entitlement. Later that same day, the Supreme Hunter brought her cubs to observe Marcus and Dr. Rodriguez at their research station. The contrast was clear. These humans moved quietly, respected boundaries, and showed awareness of their environment. The cubs learned that there were different types of humans requiring different responses. It was a nuanced lesson that most wild animals never learned, but one that could mean the difference between survival and conflict in an increasingly human-dominated landscape. As autumn approached, the cubs grew more independent. They began making short exploratory trips away from their mother, testing their skills and confidence. Shadow often ventured toward the observation area, seeming to seek out Marcus's presence. He would sit at the edge of the clearing, watching the researcher with obvious curiosity. Whisper was more circumspect, but even she occasionally approached, always ready to bolt at the first sign of anything unusual. Marcus felt honored by their trust, but also concerned. These cubs were learning that some humans were safe, but what would happen when they encountered humans who didn't share his respect for wildlife? What would happen if they approached someone who was afraid or aggressive? He discussed these concerns with Dr. Rodriguez and Sarah Mitchell, and they developed a plan to educate the public about how to behave if they encountered any of the mountain lions, especially the cubs who might be more approachable than typical wild animals. The education campaign became part of a broader initiative to promote coexistence between humans and large predators. Sarah held workshops for hikers and campers, teaching them about mountain lion behavior and how to respond to encounters. Dr. Rodriguez published papers about the Supreme Hunter's intelligence and social learning, arguing that wildlife management needed to recognize the cognitive abilities of individual animals, not just treat all members of a species as identical. Marcus's photographs and videos became teaching tools, demonstrating the beauty and complexity of wild predators when they were given the space and respect they deserved. The Supreme Hunter seemed to approve of these efforts. She continued to make appearances at the observation area, sometimes with her cubs, sometimes alone. There was a sense of partnership developing, an unspoken agreement between the mountain lion and the small group of humans who had earned her trust. She would share her world with them, allow them to learn from her, and they would work to protect her and her offspring from the dangers that humans represented. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the forest in snow and transforming the landscape into a quiet wonderland. Marcus had planned to return to the city once the weather turned, but he found himself unable to leave. The Supreme Hunter and her cubs had become central to his life, and he wanted to document how they adapted to the harsh conditions of winter. Dr. Rodriguez had returned to California, promising to come back in the spring, but Marcus remained. Along with a skeleton crew of rangers including Sarah Mitchell, the mountain lions thrived in the cold weather. Their thick winter coats protected them from the elements, and the snow made tracking prey easier. Marcus often found their paw prints in the fresh snow, evidence of their nocturnal wanderings through the forest. The Supreme Hunter had taught her cubs well, and they were becoming skilled hunters in their own right. Shadow, now nearly full-grown, had already made his first solo kill, a young deer that he had stalked with patience and precision. One particularly cold morning, Marcus was photographing ice formations along the stream when he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a cry of distress, high-pitched and desperate. He immediately recognized it as coming from one of the cubs. He grabbed his gear and ran toward the sound, his boots slipping on the icy ground. When he reached a small clearing, he found Whisper caught in an illegal trap that someone had set for smaller game. The steel jaws had closed around her back leg, and she was struggling frantically, her cries of pain echoing through the silent forest. Marcus approached slowly, talking in soothing tones, but Whisper was terrified and in pain. She tried to back away from him, but the trap held her fast. Marcus knew he had to act quickly. The longer she remained trapped, the more damage would be done to her leg. But he also knew that getting close to a frightened, injured mountain lion was extremely dangerous. He radioed Sarah Mitchell for help. then carefully began to approach the trapped cub. Before he could reach Whisper, the Supreme Hunter appeared from the trees. She moved with purpose, positioning herself between Marcus and her injured offspring. Her ears were flattened against her head, and a low growl rumbled from her chest. This was different from all their previous encounters. This was a mother protecting her young, and Marcus knew he was in real danger. He slowly backed away, giving the Supreme Hunter space while continuing to speak softly, trying to convey that he wanted to help. The Supreme Hunter approached her cub, sniffing at the trap and the injured leg. She tried to pull Whisper free, but the trap was too strong. She circled the area, growling in frustration, then looked at Marcus. In that moment, he saw something remarkable in her eyes. It was a mixture of desperation and calculation. The mountain lion was making a decision, weighing the risk against the need. Her cub was hurt, and she couldn't free her alone. She needed help, even if that help came from a human. The Supreme Hunter stepped aside, a clear invitation for Marcus to approach. He moved slowly, constantly talking to both mountain lions, explaining what he was going to do. Whisper continued to cry and struggle, but the Supreme Hunter placed herself where the cub could see her, making low, comforting sounds. Marcus knelt beside the trap, his hands shaking slightly as he examined the mechanism. It was an old steel leg-hold trap, rusty but still functional. He would need to compress the springs to release the jaws. As Marcus worked on the trap, the Supreme Hunter watched his every move. He was acutely aware that one wrong move, one action that seemed threatening, could result in an attack. But he focused on the task at hand, using his multi-tool to carefully manipulate the trap's springs. It took several agonizing minutes, but finally he felt the mechanism give way. The jaws opened, and Whisper pulled her leg free with a cry of relief. The cub immediately limped toward her mother, who checked her over thoroughly, licking the wounded leg gently. The injury was serious but not life-threatening. Marcus backed away, giving them space, but he called Sarah again with an update. They would need to monitor Whisper to ensure the wound didn't become infected. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later with a wildlife veterinarian who had been consulting on the mountain lion research. What happened next became the most powerful testament to the bond that had developed between the Supreme Hunter and the small group of humans who had earned her trust. Instead of fleeing with her injured cub, the Supreme Hunter allowed the veterinarian to examine Whisper. The mother mountain lion remained close, ready to intervene if necessary, but she seemed to understand that these humans were trying to help. The veterinarian worked quickly, cleaning the wound and administering antibiotics with a dart gun from a safe distance. Over the following weeks, Marcus monitored Whisper's recovery. The Supreme Hunter brought her cub to the observation area regularly, allowing Marcus to photograph the healing wound. Whisper's limp gradually improved, and though she would always have scars from the trap, she regained full use of her leg. The incident had brought the humans and mountain lions even closer together, demonstrating that trust could exist between species even in moments of crisis. But the trap incident had broader implications. Sarah Mitchell launched an investigation to find who had set the illegal trap. It turned out to be a local, who was angry about the restrictions placed on the forest to protect the Supreme Hunter. He believed that the mountain lions had been given too much priority over human interests, and had set the trap as an act of defiance. He was prosecuted and fined, and the incident became a rallying point for strengthening wildlife protection laws in the region. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the forest. The cubs, now nearly a year old, were approaching independence. Shadow had already begun exploring territories beyond his mother's range, showing signs that he would soon establish his own domain. Whisper, despite her injury, was also becoming more independent, though she remained closer to the Supreme Hunter than her brother did. Marcus knew that his time with this remarkable family was drawing to a close. On one of the last days of spring, the Supreme Hunter brought both her cubs to the observation area for what felt like a final visit. They sat together at the edge of the clearing, a family portrait that Marcus captured in what would become his most famous photograph. The image showed 3 mountain lions sitting peacefully, with the Supreme Hunter in the center, her golden eyes looking directly at the camera with that same intelligence and awareness that had characterized all their encounters. After several minutes, Shadow stood and walked toward Marcus. He came closer than he ever had before, stopping just a few feet away. The young mountain lion looked at Marcus with eyes that mirrored his mother's, golden and intelligent and filled with something that seemed like understanding. Then he turned and disappeared into the forest. Whisper followed soon after, pausing to look back once before vanishing among the trees. The Supreme Hunter remained. She and Marcus looked at each other across the clearing, two beings from different worlds who had somehow found a way to connect. Marcus thought about everything that had happened since that first day when the mountain lion had abandoned her hunt to look at him. He thought about the trust that had been built, the lessons he had learned, and the changes that had occurred in how both he and the mountain lion viewed each other's species. The Supreme Hunter stood and began to walk away, but she paused at the tree line. She looked back at Marcus one final time, and in that gaze he saw goodbye. Not a permanent farewell, but an acknowledgement that their regular encounters would become less frequent, that the mountain lions needed to return fully to their wild existence. The cubs were grown, the lessons had been taught, and the humans had been educated. The work was done. Marcus watched as the Supreme Hunter disappeared into the forest. He knew he might see her again, perhaps glimpse her through the trees or find her tracks in the snow. But the intense, regular interactions that had defined the past year were over. The mountain lions would return to being mostly shadows and legends, as they should be. The forest would remain, protected now by people who better understood its inhabitants. And somewhere in those woods the Supreme Hunter would continue her reign, teaching her offspring and perhaps other mountain lions about the complex reality of sharing a world with humans. That evening, Marcus packed up his equipment for the last time. He would return to the city, to his normal life, but he would carry with him the memories of something extraordinary. He had been chosen by one of nature's most magnificent predators to be witness to intelligence, trust, and the possibility of coexistence. The Supreme Hunter had taught him that wild animals were not just subjects to be studied or threats to be managed. They were individuals with their own intelligence, their own choices, and their own dignity. As Marcus drove away from the forest, he looked in his rearview mirror and saw a familiar shape standing on a ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun. The Supreme Hunter was watching him leave, a final guardian moment before she returned to the shadows. Marcus smiled, knowing that he had been part of something rare and beautiful, a connection between human and wild that most people would never experience. The Supreme Hunter had searched for prey that day so long ago, but had found something else instead. She had found understanding, respect, and proof that sometimes, even across the vast divide between species, true connection was possible.